From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soini Gerd. Political crisis averted. Peru's opposition-run Congress has renewed its confidence in the cabinet of President Martin Vizcarra. In a high-stakes vote late on Wednesday, lawmakers upheld Peru's government.
82 votes in favor, 22 against, 14 abstentions. The question of confidence has been approved.
The vote is in. Victory for Vizcarra. 82-22 in favor of Peru's president. Vizcarra urged unity when he spoke with the media after emerging from Congress.
The confidence vote that I received today is not just from the executive, but also a show of confidence from all the people of Peru.
Vizcarra had maintained optimism throughout, but the stakes were high. A no-confidence vote would have cost him his cabinet and triggered new legislative elections. However, that was not the case. So what's next? Congress must now commit to passing President Vizcarra's judicial and political reforms.
What we have proposed are 4 projects for constitutional reform. What is to be reformed is the National Magistrates Council, which was already approved yesterday, and the 3 political reforms. The 4 need to be passed, and that is the request. I made an address to the nation on Sunday, and today I repeated this to the President of the Ministers' Council, to all ministers that were present, with the same willingness and strength.
Earlier on Wednesday, President of the Ministers' Council, Cesar Villanueva, arrived for the session of Congress, and he appealed to lawmakers.
I urge all Congress members in this session to approve the remaining 3 political reforms, which include no immediate re-election, a bicamerality, and the reform on the financing of political parties.
La bicameralidad y la reforma del financiamiento de los partidos políticos.
On Sunday, Vizcarra had called for a vote of confidence to force passage of his proposed legislation, which requires modifying the Constitution.
And over in Costa Rica, oil refinery workers are protesting government's proposed tax reforms. Demonstrators have blocked major highways around the country. They've also impeded access to Costa Rica's main commercial ports and fuel distribution sites. Congress is proposing increasing taxes to stem a growing fiscal deficit. We have more from Fernando Francia.
On Wednesday, trade unions met with government officials to discuss the possibility of starting talks and ending the ongoing general strike. But workers want the government to stop moving forward with the economic reform before any meaningful talks can take place. Therefore, the strike continues, with Thursday being its 11th day. A march to the Legislative Assembly is planned, along with road blockades in other areas of the country, with demands to end repression against protesters.
Guatemalans are planning to protest once again to reject the decision of President Jimmy Morales to expel the UN Commission Against Impunity from the country. Our correspondent, Mario Rosales, has the latest from Guatemala City.
People have high expectations as the 48-hour deadline to name a new commissioner for the International Commission Against Impunity has passed. The government asked the Secretary of the UN, Antonio Guterres, to replace Ivan Velázquez, currently head of the mission. But he was banned from entering the country after President Jimmy Morales expelled the international body as well. However, the Constitutional Court has ordered the president to reverse this decision. The legal agreement signed between the government and the UN does not allow local authorities to send a list of candidates. It's the General Secretary's duty to name this person. Meanwhile, the Public Ministry has started an investigation to determine if the Foreign Minister, Sandra Joelín, committed a crime by not complying with the court's order. Demonstrations are expected on Thursday to reject the decision of Guatemala regarding the UN mission.
Protests continue in Argentina. Garo Esteban has more.
On this day, September 20th, Argentina celebrates National Pensioners' Day. Marches are being planned to the Congressional Plaza to show the difficulties recent economic reforms have brought to this sector of society. The reforms by the Cambiamos Alliance government, in part, reduced the budget for pensions, which meant that back in March, pensions increased by barely 5%. This is one of the many cutbacks and recessive measures implemented by the government that directly affect those most vulnerable. As inflation nears 50%, senior citizens have seen their purchasing power diminished, not to mention the recent reductions in subsidies for medicine. Today's protest will demand an end to these measures and also a stop to a proposal that would push back the retirement age by 5 years.
We thank you, Gado, for that report. The National Liberation Army has freed another kidnapped victim in Colombia. On Wednesday, the ELN freed a teenager who was kidnapped 2 weeks before in northwestern Colombia. The rebels handed the girl over to the Ombudsman office. She was abducted from her home in Arupa. The government believes the ELN is holding around 10 hostages. President Ivan Duque has said that in order to resume peace talks, the ELN must release all of their hostages.
The release of this girl, without any condition, as the ELN did with the other 9 kidnapped, is the minimum that the Colombian people expected. Hopefully, the ELN will continue demonstrating that it will fulfill the conditions expressed by the President.
Brazil's presidential campaign continues, and the Workers' Party candidate, Fernando Haddad, has jumped to second place according to recent polls. So for more on the election, let's hear from our correspondent, Andre Vieira, in Rio.
Fernando Haddad, the presidential candidate for the Workers' Party, has consolidated second place in the latest polls. The Ibope Institute shows that Haddad has jumped 11% to reach the second place and holds now 19% of the voting intention. In the first position, the candidate of the far right, Jair Bolsonaro, with 28%, and the center candidate, Ciro Gomes, has 11%. The biggest challenge for the Fernando Haddad is to gather all the votes from Lula da Silva, who lead all the polls for the new candidates Haddad, and his vice-presidential candidate, Manuela Dávila, from Brazil's Communist Party. There are less than 20 days to go until the elections. Haddad is now on a countrywide campaign to tell all Brazilians that he is supported by Lula, by Dilma Rousseff, and the progressive movement in the country. He will continue campaigning in the state of Sao Paulo, one of the largest and with the highest amount of votes.
Mexican rescue workers attended a religious ceremony to mark the anniversary of 2 deadly earthquakes. One devastated the country a year ago, claiming around 400 lives, but the first, in 1985, killed more than 10,000 people. Rescuers say the country needs to be better prepared for these sort of tragedies.
As we were hit again, the new generation realized that it is not a joke, that we need to be prepared, and we must get closer to the civil protection.
At around 1:14 p.m., the moment the quake struck, rescuers and even President Peña Nieto stood in silence with fists raised. Rescue workers had used this gesture to request quiet as they listened for signs of life below the rubble. Shortly after, authorities activated quick alarms and office workers began carrying out practice runs for emergency evacuations of buildings, as had been tradition before the quake struck. Time now for a quick break. We'll have more news in a minute.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur. An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along and find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Mexico's indigenous people lament that their communities have been hardest hit by water privatization. Our correspondent Eduardo Martinez explains.
A scarcity of drinking water has been a constant problem for people living east of Mexico City. In this housing complex, for example, residents have access to drinking water only for a few hours, and twice a week at that.
We have many elderly people who are not physically able to make the trek to collect water and carry it back up. We have a third floor. We seek residents, people with weak bones, and there are also many children. Our building sometimes cannot be clean as we don't have the water for it, or even water to wash clothes, bath, or for cooking.
Statistics reveal that some 44 million people lack drinking water in Mexico. Most of these people are from indigenous communities.
Most times there's no water for weeks. This problem has existed for over a decade, and for years they have kept promising us water free of charge, but what comes out of the tap is horrible quality, certainly not fit for consumption.
The cost of these water problems vary throughout the country. This group of communal landowners believe the state of San Luis Potosí is trying to deprive them of their livelihood. There's no water to irrigate their crops.
What we have is very little water, mainly surface water. Yet, there is a steady growth of both the mining and agro industries. They mainly produce tomatoes for export, and for that, they use up all of the available natural resources.
In the town of Tlanixco, in the state of Mexico, a group of farmers was accused of murder, but their families say they're trying to desperately safeguard the water for their communities.
Unfortunately, the state of Mexico, together with the floriculture companies in the municipality of Villa Guerrero, have mostly used the water for agriculture. Already in the year 2000, my husband and other people were part of the Committee for Drinking Water.
Various social groups met to discuss the water situation and to offer recommendations to be included in proposed legislation, which the National Regeneration Movement will present to the Senate.
They should include a language in the proposal that will lay the foundation for a future law that would prevent any privatization of waterworks.
Indigenous communities are demanding consultation ahead of the mega project, while people in urban areas are calling for proper management of existing water resources.
People living near industrial parks in Chile are paying a high price for the economic development that only benefits a few in the country. So let's see how the industries are affecting their daily lives in this report.
As day breaks, we start our journey towards the coast. The presence of heavy trucks indicates we are closer to our destination. After more than an hour trip, we finally arrived to the Puchuncavi commune, one of the small communities in the coast side of the region known as sacrifice zones. Despite being next to the sea, it's not the fresh smell of the water you feel here. Instead, the air is heavy with foul chemical odors, and the strong voices of discontent are also hard to miss. Just 160 kilometers from the capital, Puchuncavi and Quintero lie on a big sea bay.
Here, someone visualized that the bay can be used for industrial projects, only thinking about their economic benefits.
Gilectra, the first company here installed in 1958, is one of the biggest private electric companies in Latin America. After that came many others, like the thermoelectric power plant AES Jenner, the copper smelter Codelco, the National Petrol Company ENAP, and so on. In total, 19 big companies. All these companies have been polluting the area for years. Very little remains of the area's natural wealth. It is used to be the third biggest producer of vegetables in the country. But now, the lack of agricultural products is forcing people to leave.
We all know how capitalism is. It's evil. They do not care about human beings. And here we are suffering from its atrocious consequences. We are being just seen as commodities, nothing else. Our lives, our living conditions today is the outcome of what this industrial zone is creating.
There has been widespread criticism of the neoliberal economic policies introduced during the dictatorship and continued under democratic governments.
We don't like that a percentage of our people have to be martyrs in order to achieve economic growth, and not for the benefit of the ordinary masses, but for the benefit for the rich.
People continue to suffer the consequences of pollution and keep fighting against a system that sees them as just collateral damage in the accumulation of wealth.
The governor of the Central Bank of Barbados has announced the restructuring of the domestic debt. Economists say it could mean people will lose money as they will get less returns on their investments in the form of government bonds. The government has said earlier that there was no other alternative to tackle the country's massive debt burden. Prime Minister Martin has been in talks with the International Monetary Fund about reprofiling the debt.
You will see for these structures that are being offered that they're being amortized, I think in most cases quarterly. So it means that every quarter a little bit of that bond, so it was $100,000, but in the first quarter you might be getting, let's say, $1,000, the next quarter another $1,000. So you're being repaid gradually, but as you're being repaid, that also helps to reduce the stock of debt.
And our correspondent in Bridgetown, Kareem Smith, provides details on Barbados' debt burden.
Of course, government's current debt, which has risen to 157% of GDP, is simply too large at this point. We also know that the previous government was engaging in the dangerous practice of borrowing money from the central bank to meet its local obligations, also known as printing money, particularly to pay the salaries of the country's large public sector, which currently provides important services like healthcare and education up to the tertiary level. Of course, it's expected government under the current International Monetary Fund program will be looking to reduce its wage bill and perhaps explore the option of privatization to ensure a crisis of this nature, an economic crisis of this nature, doesn't happen again. I was also speaking to a local economist, Jeremy Stevens, who reminded me that Barbados is the third most indebted country in the world on a per capita scale, leaving the new Mia Mottley-led government to make somewhat unfavorable decisions which will invariably affect the average person on the street.
The leaders of Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana have signed a major memorandum of understanding on energy sector cooperation. The MOU also includes cooperation in agriculture and security. The move comes as Guyana is in the midst of rapidly expanding its oil and gas sectors, but Guyana's private sector has been wary of Trinidad's involvement in their energy sector.
So for both of us, it's a win-win situation. And I would say for the Caribbean community as well, this is a significant step in making the Caribbean community stronger. Thank you.
What today represents is a documentation of our commitment to do more in our neighborly relations with respect to the generation of economic and other kinds of activities for the benefit of the people of Guyana and Trinidad and Tobago.
St. Kitts and Nevis celebrated the 35th anniversary of its independence on Wednesday. The Caribbean island gained independence from Britain in 1983. The islands were the first site of British colonial settlers in the Caribbean in the 17th century. The day is celebrated with festivals all over the islands and a speech by the Prime Minister. We'll take another short break now. More news after this.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Enjoy our programming from Monday to Friday, where you'll find the best information on innovation, conservation, human well-being, and human rights. Keep up to date on the latest innovations in science and technology with Atomun. The habits and knowledge you need to live a healthy lifestyle are on Guide Your Body. Environmental consciousness is required to preserve our Earth. Undergo your transformation on Green Zone. We defend the struggles of peoples in resistance fighting for their rights. Between Borders. All about equity, diversity, and respect for identity on By Gender. Every day we feature a wide variety of content. Only on Telesur, the news source from Latin America and the Caribbean.
Welcome back. Employees of the fast food giant McDonald's in the United States are on strike to protest sexual harassment. Demonstrations are taking place in Kansas City and Chicago. They're demanding that management take stronger action against sexual harassment in the workplace.
No single worker in any industry in the last century has gone on strike for sexual harassment. So today, fast food workers, just like me, are breaking the silence. We're taking this historic step, and we're going on strike to tell McDonald's no more sexual harassment.
In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the Electoral Commission has published its official list of candidates for December's presidential elections. And while the lineup gives the green light to 2 opposition candidates, it excludes 2 heavyweight contenders actually, Jean-Pierre Bemba and Moise Katumbi. There had been several bloody protests during the tenure of the current president, Joseph Kabila. Voting day is scheduled for December 23rd.
The plenary assembly of the Semi makes public the final list of the 21 presidential candidates of the republic.
In Zimbabwe, President Emerson Mnangagwa has ruled out a return to the local dollar, at least until economic fundamentals have been corrected. He says the multiple currency regime introduced in 2009 will remain in place. The government will now institute measures to stabilize the microeconomic environment, reduce budget deficit, and grow the economy.
One of the biggest challenges that industry has been facing in our country has been the lack of credit lines, the lack of international financial support in terms of their business activities. So any international line of credit will assist revive industries here, assist businesses here be able to do international trade, and I think this is a very important aspect that His Excellency mentioned.
The fiscal side is also an albatross
on the monetary side. So if we're going to have monetary sector reforms, also reforms on the fiscal side, for which I mean is reduce the budget's deficit, get it down to single digit as quickly as we can, and also adopt a budgeting approach that always take a medium-term approach. So we must be clear where we want to be in 3 years' time in terms of our fiscal balances, but also controlling expenditure and making sure that on the revenue side we broaden the tax base.
Zambian President Edgar Lungu has fired the cabinet minister in charge of social welfare funds. She was axed after Britain and Finland froze aid over suspicions that more than $4 million of aid may have been misappropriated. The minister is accused of using funds meant for payments to vulnerable households to refurbish her office. The president has further ordered the investigative wings to probe the misappropriation allegations. Displaced Ethiopians recount deadly violence against ethnic minorities in the suburbs of the country's capital. About 23 people from Ethiopia's ethnic minorities have been killed during the last few days in the suburbs of Addis Ababa. Displaced victims blame the attacks on the country's largest ethnicity, the Oromos. People angered by the killings protested on the roads in the capital, leaving a further 5 people dead.
When they tried to cut my granddaughter's breast, I took out mine and I begged them to cut mine instead. Then they stopped, but they took her father.
Behind the bars in Burkina Faso, a young rapper is set to release his debut album after winning a talent show in prison. 25-year-old Jonathan Suge actually is ready to release his first album as soon as he's granted parole. The musician, known as Jonte O, has been in jail for 2 years for robbery. The initiative was launched by the Burkina musical Freeman Tapley, who hopes this project can help the rehabilitation of inmates. Nice sounds there. We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisiotv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talicio English, I'm Sony Gray. Thank you for watching.